The wind off the North Atlantic in October carried teeth. It bit through wool sweaters, stung cheeks raw, and made the beams of the Cranberry Point lighthouse sweep across the black water, like a warning that no one heeded anymore. The lighthouse had been automated 20 years ago, but the keeper's cottage still stood, stubborn against the salt and the storms, and so did the woman who lived in it. Clara Hawthorne was 31, unmarried, and perfectly content with both facts, or so she told herself every morning when she woke to the cry of gulls and the crash of waves against the rocks 200 feet below her bedroom window. Her father, Jonah Hawthorne, had been the last official keeper until the Coast Guard took over. When he died 3 winters ago, the town assumed Clara would sell the cottage and move inland like a sensible person. Instead, she stayed. She painted seascapes that sold modestly in the tourist galleries down in Harbor's End, kept the gardens her mother had loved, and maintained the lighthouse steps out of habit and love, even though no one climbed them anymore. She was sanding the rust off the old brass bell on the porch the day in late October when the stranger appeared. He came on foot, which was unusual. Most visitors arrived by car on the gravel road that ended half a mile back. This man walked the cliff path with a canvas duffel over one shoulder and a limp that favored his left leg. The wind whipped his dark hair across his forehead, and his coat, expensive once, now salt-stained and torn at the cuff, flapped around him like a broken wing. He stopped at her gate and looked up at the cottage as though he'd been walking toward it his whole life. "Afternoon," he called over the wind. His voice was low, a little hoarse, like someone who hadn't used it in days. Clara set the sandpaper down. "Afternoon. You lost." "Depends what you mean by lost." He shifted the bag higher. "I'm looking for Clara Hawthorne." "That's me." He studied her for a long moment, as if confirming something only he could see. "My name is Nicholas Kane. Your father saved my life 23 years ago. I was hoping I could repay the debt." Clara's heart gave one hard, startled beat. 23 years ago, she had been 8 years old. She remembered that night clearly. The November storm that felt like the end of the world. The freighter that ran aground on the Devil's Teeth rocks, her father going out in the little rescue skiff with 3 other men while her mother prayed on the widow's walk. Only 2 came back. Her father had carried a boy ashore, 12 years old, half drowned, the sole survivor from the crew's quarters. The boy had stayed with them for 6 weeks while the authorities tried to locate family. Then one day he was gone, taken away by a silent woman in a gray coat. Clara had cried for a week. She looked at the man in front of her now, tall, lean, storm-eyed, and saw the ghost of that frightened boy. "You're Nicky," she said softly. A muscle jumped in his jaw. "I haven't been Nicky since the night your father pulled me out of the water." He looked like he wanted to say more, but the wind stole the words. Clara opened the gate.
"Come in."
"You look half frozen." Inside the cottage smelled of wood smoke and cinnamon. Clara had been baking to keep her hands busy. She poured coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in and set a plate of apple cake in front of him without asking. He ate like a man who hadn't tasted home in years. When he finished, he wrapped both hands around the mug and stared into the black liquid. "I'm not here for nostalgia," he said. "I'm here because your father wrote me a letter before he died. It arrived last spring. I was out of the country. It took a while to reach me." He pulled a folded envelope from his coat pocket. The paper was worn soft, as though it had been read 100 times. Clara recognized her father's careful block printing on the front. "Nicholas Kane, wherever you are." "I can't read it to you," Nicholas said quietly. "It's private." But the last line, he asked me to come back to Cranberry Point and make sure his daughter wasn't alone. Clara felt something crack inside her chest. "He never told me he wrote to you. He waited 23 years to play matchmaker from beyond the grave?" She tried to laugh, but it came out shaky. Nicholas's mouth curved, not quite a smile. Jonah Hawthorne always did have timing. The first week he stayed in the village inn, but every morning he appeared at the cottage with tools or groceries, or simply his quiet presence. He fixed the leaking gutter, replaced the rotted porch boards, and climbed the lighthouse tower to oil hinges that hadn't moved in decades. He never asked to stay. He simply made himself indispensable. Clara watched him warily. She had spent years perfecting self-sufficiency. She did not trust easy rescues. But Nicholas never pushed. When she painted, he sat on the rocks below and read. When storms rolled in, he helped her batten the shutters without being asked. And every night he walked back down the cliff path alone. One evening in early November, the power went out across the whole cape. Clara lit the oil lamps and the old cast-iron stove. She found Nicholas on her doorstep soaked to the skin, carrying a crate of split birch he'd chopped that afternoon. "You'll catch your death," she scolded, pulling him inside. "I've survived worse," he said, but he let her take his coat. They ate stew by firelight. Outside, the wind screamed like it had the night of the shipwreck. Clara found herself talking, really talking, for the first time in years. She told him about her mother's death when she was 16, about nursing her father through cancer, about the guilt that she hadn't been able to save either of them the way her father had saved Nicholas. He listened without interrupting, the firelight carving sharp shadows across his face. When she finished, the silence stretched long and comfortable. Then he spoke, voice rough. "After your father put me on that train with the social worker, I went into foster care. 3 different homes. None of them bad, none of them home. I ran away at 16, lied about my age, joined the Merchant Marine. Spent 15 years at sea. Made money. Enough that I don't have to work another day in my life if I don't want to. But every port I docked in, I looked for this place. For him. For you." Clara's throat tightened. "Why didn't you come sooner?" "Because I was ashamed," he said simply. "The boy your father saved grew up hard. I've done things I'm not proud of. I didn't think I had the right to walk back into your life, carrying all that weight." She studied him across the flickering light. "And now your father's voice in my head is louder than the shame." Something shifted in the room, like a tide turning. The next morning the power was still out, the phone lines down. Snow had started, early, thick, relentless. The village below was cut off for days. Nicholas moved into the guest room without either of them discussing it. They lived like an old married couple in the eye of the storm. He chopped wood, she baked bread. They played cards by lamplight and read aloud from her father's dog-eared copy of Moby Dick. One night the temperature plummeted so low the pipes froze, and they ended up sharing the living room floor in front of the fireplace, wrapped in quilts, shoulders touching. Clara woke before dawn and found Nicholas staring at the embers. "Can't sleep," she whispered. He shook his head. "Dreams." She knew better than to ask which ones. Instead she said, "When I was little, after you left, I used to pretend you were my big brother. I'd save a seat for you at dinner, talk to you when I walked the cliff path. My mother let me. She said some people leave pieces of themselves behind, and it's okay to keep them close." Nicholas turned to look at her. In the half-dark his eyes were very blue. "I kept the sweater your mother knitted me. Still have it. It's in my bag." Clara felt tears rise without permission. She reached out and touched his cheek, rough with a week's beard. He turned his face into her palm like a man starving for gentleness. The kiss, when it came, was inevitable, slow, wondering, tasting of wood smoke and forgiveness. After that, the boundaries dissolved. They cooked together, laughed together, made love in the hush before dawn with the storm still howling outside like it approved. When the roads finally cleared 10 days later, Nicholas did not leave. Spring arrived fierce and early. The lupins exploded purple across the cliffs, and the tourists returned to Harbor's End. Clara's little gallery sold every painting she brought in. Nicholas, quiet, competent Nicholas, turned out to have an eye for restoration. He bought the abandoned Coast Guard boathouse at auction, converted it into a workshop, and began building custom wooden boats the way other men golfed. People came from as far as Boston to watch him work, but some nights he still woke shouting, dreams of cold black water closing over his head. Clara learned to hold him until the shaking stopped, to whisper, "You're here. You're safe. You're home." One August evening, the sunset turned the whole ocean to molten copper. They walked the cliff path hand in hand, the same path Nicholas had limped up almost a year before. He stopped at the highest point, where the lighthouse beams still swept every 10 seconds even though no keeper tended it. "I have something for you," he said. From his pocket, he drew a small wooden box he'd carved himself, rowan wood, pale and fine-grained. Inside, on a bed of sea glass, lay a ring, white gold shaped like breaking waves, set with a single sapphire the color of deep water at noon. Clara's breath caught. "I asked your father's permission first," Nicholas said, voice rough. "Stood at his grave last week and told him everything. Told him I love his daughter with every part of me that he saved that night. Asked if I could spend the rest of my life making her as happy as she makes me." Tears slipped down Clara's cheeks. "I don't have much to offer," he continued. "A past I can't change. A future I want to build right here, with my hands and my heart. But if you'll have me—" Clara kissed him before he could finish, salt on her lips and laughter in her throat. "Yes," she said against his mouth. 1,000 times yes. They married in October, exactly 1 year to the day he had walked up her path, on the lighthouse gallery with the beams sweeping over them like a blessing. The entire village came, plus a few weathered sailors who claimed Nicholas had once pulled them out of worse storms than this. Sophie, the flower girl from the village school, scattered lupin petals that the wind carried out to sea. At the reception in the boathouse, now hung with fairy lights and smelling of pine and salt, Nicholas raised a toast with a glass of cider. "To Jonah Hawthorne," he said, voice steady, "who taught me that being saved isn't a debt to be repaid, it's a light to be passed on. And to Clara, who showed me that home isn't a place you run from the storm to, it's the person you run toward it with." Later, when the guests had gone and the moon rode high and silver, they climbed the lighthouse steps one last time. Nicholas carried Clara over the threshold of the lantern room the way grooms do with houses. They made love on the narrow cot once meant for storm-bound keepers, with the great lens turning slowly above them, casting moving bars of light across their skin like promises. Years later, when people asked how they met, Clara would smile and say, "A storm brought him to me." And Nicholas would add quietly, "And a good man's love sent me back." The lighthouse still stands at Cranberry Point. The beam still sweeps every 10 seconds, though no one tends it. But if you climb the stairs on a quiet night, you might see 2 figures on the gallery, a woman with wind-tangled hair and a man whose limp is barely noticeable anymore, arms around each other, watching the stars come out over the restless sea.